Some men were never shot, never stabbed, never even touched by violence. And yet, they are dying every single day. Slowly, invisibly, efficiently, not from wounds, but from words. Not what others say to them, but what they whisper to themselves. This is just how I am. I'm fine. It's not my fault. Each sentence, a small act of self-erasure. Each phrase, a quiet burial of strength. They call it character. They call it wisdom. They say they've made peace. But peace, without truth, is just a prison with soft lighting. These men aren't weak. They're disciplined, hardworking, capable. But behind their composure lurks a deadly pattern. A pattern of language that slowly strips them of presence, of power, of purpose. Machiavelli never feared weakness. He feared men who refused to see it, because blindness, when repeated long enough, becomes identity. And once your weakness becomes your identity, you no longer need enemies. You've already surrendered. This video is not comfort. It's confrontation. We are going to dissect 6 phrases, not because they sound wrong, but because they sound right, to the part of you that's too tired to grow. If you've ever wondered why people stop listening, stop respecting, stop leaning in when you speak, it's not your tone, it's not your timing, it's the quiet truth behind your own words that's hollowed out your voice. So now, you listen, not to me, but to the words you didn't realize have been silently undoing you. It sounds solid, definitive, like a line drawn in blood. This is just how I am. But that phrase isn't a declaration. It's a sentence. Not a sentence you speak. A sentence you serve. Because every time a man says it, what he really means is, I've stopped becoming. He mistakes stillness for strength, consistency for character, stubbornness for self-respect. But a man who refuses to evolve isn't standing firm. He's sinking slowly. While calling it integrity, there was a man named Carl, retired Navy, iron posture, sharp suit, the kind of man who could walk into a room and silence it. But behind closed doors, he was already fading. Every time his wife asked for connection, Carl closed the door on his own vulnerability. Every time his son tried to open old wounds, Carl muttered, "That's not how I do things." And day by day, he stopped responding, not with anger, but with absence. No fights, no storms, just a slow erosion of presence. His marriage didn't explode. It evaporated, and when she finally left, she didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She just stopped waiting. Because that's what this phrase really does. It doesn't push people away. It drains their hope. You say, "This is just how I am," to protect yourself. But what you're really protecting is your ego's last defense, predictability, and the cost, your relevance, your leadership, your capacity to be anything more than a statue of who you were 10 years ago. He thought strength meant not changing, but he forgot that rot doesn't need fire. It only needs stillness. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." But most men, they stop learning long before they stop breathing, and they call it wisdom. They confuse mileage with mastery, experience with evolution. But one can exist without the other. A man who repeats the same defense over and over is not strong, he's scripted, like a ghost, playing a role in a life he no longer leads. Look around. The men who inspire are not the ones who stay the same. They're the ones who sharpen, who break, who rebuild, not because the world demands it, but because their own standard refuses to settle. A Stoic doesn't cling to identity. He carves it like a blade through marble, one honest cut at a time. He doesn't say, "This is who I am." He asks, "Who must I become to match the truth I've uncovered today?" There's a difference. One is resignation. The other is rebirth. So what happens? To the man who refuses to change, he shrinks. His world narrows. His words become short. His thoughts recycled. His value forgotten. Not because people hate him, but because they stopped expecting anything new. And when people stop expecting you to grow, that's not peace. That's irrelevance. You weren't rejected for being yourself. You were abandoned for refusing to evolve. So next time you feel that phrase rising in your throat, catch it and ask, is this the truth? Or is this the sound of a man too afraid to become something greater? A man who clings to his past self is just a statue waiting for time to forget him. You were made to move, to refine, to resurrect. Start now. If this cut deep, don't scroll past it. Comment below. What version of yourself have you been defending that deep down you're already done with? Like this video, share it with one man who's been standing still too long. Subscribe for more. And if this message sharpened you, support our work with a super thanks so we can keep producing content. That doesn't flatter. It forges. He's composed. He provides. He doesn't flinch. Ask him how he's doing. He shrugs, smiles, says, "I'm good, always good." And deep inside, the dam is cracking. You see, he's been taught that strength means silence, that emotions are a woman's game, that real men don't flinch, don't cry, don't speak from the gut. But here's the truth. The man who never speaks about his pain doesn't avoid weakness. He incubates it. Because silence, when weaponized against yourself, doesn't build control. It builds rot. And that rot grows slowly, without sound, until it collapses everything. From the inside, according to the American Psychological Association, men who suppress emotion face higher risk of depression, heart failure, even early death. But no one tells you that in the locker room, or in your father's lessons, or in war stories told over whiskey. Instead, you learn to armor up, to keep your voice flat, to smile while your chest caves in. But the truth is, that armor, it's not forged from discipline. It's welded from fear. Fear that if you open up, you'll fall apart. Fear that if someone sees your grief, they'll see your weakness. So you stay silent. You wear it like a badge and call it manhood. But it's not manhood. It's emotional exile. You don't get extra points for bleeding quietly. You just bleed longer. Real stoicism is not suppression. It's observation, clarity, sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, a warrior, a philosopher, wrote daily about his fears, his regrets, his pain, not to the world, but to himself, because knowing what you feel is how you lead it. Not naming your emotions doesn't make them disappear. It makes them feral. They show up later as rage, as addiction, as emptiness, and you wonder why people around you feel like they're walking on eggshells. The truth, they're not afraid of your strength. They're afraid of your silence because it has no shape, no face, no warning, just cold. So what does a real man do? He feels, not in front of everyone, but with honesty. He faces, not to perform, but to command his inner world. You think silence is control? Then why do you still feel out of control? You think not crying means you're composed. Then why do you break at the smallest things? This isn't about emotions being good or bad. It's about whether they lead you or you lead them. And that leadership begins not with volume, but with naming. Say it. I feel angry. I feel ashamed. I feel tired of pretending. Not for drama, for direction. Because emotions don't demand attention. They demand clarity. You weren't meant to be numb. You were meant to be aware. And until you are, you will repeat the pain. You refuse to articulate. So here's what I'll leave you with. That man who says, real men don't talk about feelings. He's not stoic. He's scared, and scared men make silent messes. That become loud consequences. You don't need to cry in public. You just need to stop pretending. You're unbreakable. Because silence isn't peace. It's pressure. And pressure without release always becomes collapse. Speak in the comments. What emotion have you silenced for too long? Drop one truth you've never dared to say out loud. Start now. He says it almost casually, with a shrug, with practiced disappointment. It's not my fault. It sounds reasonable, even rational. But what it really is the soft decay of self-responsibility. Because every time you say that sentence, you hand over the steering wheel of your life. You're no longer the driver. You're the passenger. You're not directing. You're reacting. And no man earns respect by surrendering control. He thought he was protecting his innocence, but he was forfeiting his influence. Men love to believe they're victims of the world, victims of fate, of bad timing, of poor leadership, of how they were raised, of who they married. But every time you choose blame over ownership, you shrink your ability to respond, to pivot, to lead. Machiavelli warned, he who allows others to guide his fortune will one day curse them for where he's arrived. In other words, if you outsource responsibility, don't be surprised when you wake up powerless. Let me break this down. A man who always blames is rehearsing weakness, and like all rehearsals, it becomes muscle memory. Soon, he can't see where he's complicit, only where he's wounded. He trades clarity for comfort, agency for ego. He stops asking, "What can I do?" and starts declaring, "Look what they did to me." Here's the truth. It's not always your fault, but it's always your responsibility. Because what happens to you is rarely your choice. But what you do next, that's all you. Epictetus said, it's not events that disturb us, but our opinion about them. You didn't get the job. She walked away. He betrayed you. But your interpretation, that it defines you, that it breaks you, that it robs you, that's what destroys you. Because no matter how cruel life gets, the Stoic never gives it permission. To govern his reaction, he may suffer, but he still chooses. He may bleed, but he still commands his posture. Blame is easy. It's instant. It gives you a temporary out. But responsibility, that requires structure. It forces you to sit with your role, to ask better questions, to stop waiting for apologies, and start building forward with brutal honesty. Let me be specific. The man who blames his past uses trauma as a compass, but never chooses a new direction. The man who blames his ex fails to see what patterns he brought into love. The man who blames the system forgets that the system isn't here to rescue anyone. And the man who blames fate dies before realizing he had a voice in the script all along. He thought his pain was proof of his powerlessness, but it was really a prompt to rise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not a quote. That's a blueprint. Your reaction, your direction, your discipline, that's the battlefield. Not what happened, but what happens next. Because the moment you stop asking, what went wrong, and start asking, what can I control, you cross the line from victim to strategist. And that shift is everything. Blame feels good until you realize it has no exit strategy. So ask yourself, what have I been blaming? That deep down, I know I was meant to own. Type it below. What have you been blaming that you secretly know you could change? This is your moment to shift from victim to strategist. Comment what you're taking ownership of today. Either serve better. Say it out loud. Let it echo for a second. Now ask, better than what? Better than who? And based on what effort? Because this phrase is one of the most dangerous. Dressed in dignity, it doesn't scream. It simmers, quiet, subtle, smug. A man says it, not when he's working harder, but when he's waiting longer. Not when he's refining himself, but when he's resenting the world for not recognizing what he thinks he already is. Entitlement rarely shows up loud. It shows up passive. It shows up in men who secretly believe life owes them for the pain they've endured or the potential they've never fully activated. He didn't want better. He wanted easier, and he called that fairness. Here's the reality. Machiavelli would laugh at the phrase, "I deserve better," because, in his world, deserve has no seat at the table. Only leverage does. Only action does. You want better? Build it. Sharpen for it. Prove it in silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not waste time wondering what a good man should be. Be one." That sentence kills entitlement in one line. It doesn't care what you think you're owed. It cares what you've become. Because no one respects a man who believes he should have more while doing less. The Stoic doesn't demand. He develops. He doesn't sit with folded arms, waiting for life to notice him. He moves. He crafts. He creates gravity. And gravity pulls what's meant to come. Let me ask you, have you been announcing your value more than you've been increasing it? Have you mistaken dissatisfaction for ambition? Because real ambition doesn't whine. It works. It sharpens in silence. It doesn't say, "I deserve." It says, "I will become." The man who clings to "I deserve better" often does it because it's easier than facing the work he's been avoiding. He wants rewards without refinement. He wants results without resistance. He wants recognition for things he's only thought about doing. He built no kingdom, but was angry he wasn't treated like a king. You want better relationships. Become more trustworthy, more self-aware, more souverän. You want better income. Master harder skills. Solve bigger problems. Add uncommon value. You want more respect. Carry yourself like a man who doesn't need it to do the right thing. Because the moment you attach your self-worth to what the world hasn't given you yet, you've already lost your axis. The Stoic doesn't move with resentment. He moves with responsibility. And that shift, that internal recalibration, is the difference between a man who grows sharper with struggle and one who gets duller with every unmet expectation. Here's a brutal truth. Sometimes you don't get what you deserve. You get what you consistently align with. And if you're not getting better, Maybe it's not the world. Maybe it's your unwillingness to evolve. So drop the statement. Drop the pout. Drop the narrative. Replace it with the question, am I still sharpening? Because that question holds you accountable to the process, not the prize. You don't rise by asking for more. You rise by becoming too valuable to ignore. So next time that phrase shows up in your chest, catch it, cut it, and choose something sharper. Let's get real. What have you been expecting? Without putting in the work, type, no more waiting. I'm building. If you're done with silent entitlement, he clocks in. He shows up. He does what's asked, and nothing more. To the world. He's reliable, punctual, unbothered. But behind that predictability, lies quiet su render. Every time he says, that's not my job, what he really means is, that's not my responsibility anymore. At first, it sounds healthy, like boundaries, like balance. But if you look closer, it's not protection, it's avoidance. It's the start of something slower, darker, deadlier. The silent decay of leadership. He didn't leave the battlefield. He just stopped picking up the sword. Let me tell you about Ryan. Old machinist, 30 years. Never missed a shift. 5 a.m. Sharp. At the factory, he was the model of consistency. At home, he was a ghost. The dishes, not his job. Helping his teenage son figure out life. Not his job. Emotional connection with his wife. Definitely not his job. He provided. He paid bills. Existed. But he never arrived. When his wife left after 28 years, she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stopped asking. And Ryan, sitting in that same kitchen chair, said the saddest sentence a man can utter. I did everything I was supposed to do. And maybe he did. But being useful is not the same as being present. And being consistent is not the same as being connected. Machiavelli would say this man mistook obedience for power. He thought doing just enough was enough. But leaders aren't remembered for what they avoided. They're remembered for what they carried willingly. Stoicism teaches action, not checklist survival. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is your vocation? To be a good man, not a passive one, not a hidden one. A man who sees what must be done and moves." The Stoic doesn't ask, "Is this my role?" He asks, "Is this my moment?" That's the shift. Because the man who always says, "That's not my job," is outsourcing his influence. Quietly, he's shrinking, bit by bit, until he no longer leads. He's just tolerated, like a machine that still runs, but hasn't been upgraded in years. He was never irresponsible, just uninvolved, until no one needed him anymore. Men use "not my job" to sound firm, to sound clear, but they forget. Greatness is found, not in what's assigned, but in what's assumed. A true man steps into the gap no one else wants to touch. He fixes the light bulb no one asked about. He comforts without being begged. He offers without being noticed. Because leadership doesn't need applause. It needs presence. So ask yourself, where have you started doing only what's required? Where have you traded responsibility for routine? Where have you started believing that showing up was the same as leading forward? Because the man who only does what's on the list eventually becomes a name no one remembers. Not because he failed, but because he faded. A man isn't measured by the tasks he completes, but by the weight he chooses to carry. Without being asked, confess below. Where have you stopped showing up as a leader? If this hit you, share the one area you'll take silent responsibility for this week. Let's make presence louder than pride. He says it with a shrug, with a half smile, with the tired acceptance of someone who's stopped asking questions. It is what it is. At first, it sounds stoic, detached, peaceful. But listen closely. It's not detachment. It's disengagement. Because the man who says that phrase, over and over, is no longer reacting to life. He's retreating from it. He's not adjusting. He's surrendering. With style, with posture, with the quiet elegance of a man who's been tired too long to care anymore. Machiavelli feared this kind of man, not because he was loud, but because he was finished. A man who loses his fire doesn't burn the world. He lets it pass him by, unquestioned, unchallenged, unchanged. He called it maturity, but it was really just mental fatigue. Wearing a suit, Stoicism teaches you to accept what you cannot control, but never to abandon what you still can. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It is what it is. Should be a comma, not a period. A pause before action, not an excuse to stop. But men today use it like a full stop to all responsibility. They say it when things go wrong, when relationships fall apart, when dreams dissolve quietly in the night. And then they go back to scrolling, to numbing, to routines that look like survival, but feel like sleep. That phrase becomes their shield, their exit, their soft resignation. But resignation is not wisdom. It's emotional hibernation. Let me ask you, how many areas of your life right now are you no longer fighting for? Not because they're impossible, but because you've convinced yourself they're not worth it. That's the lie inside the shrug. Not acceptance, but apathy. Acceptance says, "This is hard, but I'm here for it." Apathy says, "This is hard, so I disappear." You think you're calm, but you're just tired. You think you're above it, but really, you've just stopped moving. And here's the danger. That phrase starts small, but it spreads. It creeps into relationships, into career, into your physical body, until every moment of hesitation is met with surrender. Every obstacle met with a sigh. Every opportunity met with a shrug, until your life no longer moves forward. It just happens, without you in it. He didn't break. He evaporated, one quiet compromise at a time. And the world, it doesn't punish that man. It forgets him, because the world doesn't hate stagnation. It simply moves past it. There's a difference between stillness and submission, between grace under pressure and giving up with polish, between enduring and eroding. You know when you're still in control, and you know when you've let go so long ago that you barely recognize your own reflection. So next time that phrase creeps into your throat, stop, not with fear, but with force. Look at your life and ask, what parts of this am I still responsible for? What parts have I quietly buried under the illusion of acceptance? Because one day you'll say it is what it is, for the last time, and by then it won't be a statement. It'll be an epitaph. Don't scroll past this question. Where have you been pretending to accept? But deep down, you've given up. Type, no more apathy. If you're done surrendering with style, I'm just being honest. Sounds noble. Sounds raw. sounds real, but often it's a disguise, not for truth, but for a lack of discipline, because honesty without aim is not courage, it's carelessness. It's the man who cuts and calls it clarity, the man who wounds and calls it wisdom. He speaks without pause, without context, without cost. He says, I don't sugarcoat, I say it like it is. But what he really means is, I never learned to filter my emotions into something useful. He wasn't being honest. He was bleeding on everyone and calling it transparency. The Stoic does not fear honesty. He sharpens it, distills it, wields it with intent. He doesn't unload his chaos under the excuse of just being real. He observes, he processes, then he speaks. With precision, Marcus Aurelius wrote, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But truth without wisdom is still destruction, and a man who worships his raw emotions as if they were sacred will justify every outburst as authenticity. Here's the paradox. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is say nothing until the words have passed through fire. Unrefined honesty is like handing someone a sword while you're still shaking. The damage it causes doesn't make you strong, it makes you irresponsible. And what's worse, men use honesty as a shield for cruelty. They critique when they should reflect. They lash out when they should listen. They interrupt when they should pause, all in the name of truth. But truth without timing is sabotage. Truth without care is arrogance. Truth without self-awareness is just another form of noise. He didn't speak to clarify. He spoke to offload, to dump his chaos into someone else's lap. There is a difference between honesty and emotional dumping, between saying what is real and vomiting what is raw, between opening your mind and projecting your mess. The Stoic man knows a truth spoken too early becomes a lie, because it doesn't land, it wounds, it alienates. And what's left is not understanding, but distance. So, let me ask you, have you used honesty to justify emotional immaturity? Have you used, I'm just being real, to dodge the work of becoming refined? Because brutal honesty isn't always brave. Sometimes it's just lazy. It's easier to speak than to think, easier to judge than to understand, easier to blame than to build. Machiavelli warned, a man who speaks without calculation is already handing his power to others. You want to be respected? Let your silence hold weight. Let your words be crafted, not dumped. Let your truth be tested, not trigger. Because when every emotion becomes a statement, you stop being a strategist and you become a speaker on autopilot. Eventually, people stop listening, not because you weren't honest, but because your honesty always arrived without armor, without thought, without structure, and unstructured truth becomes chaos. So next time the phrase rises, I'm just being honest, ask yourself, is this really clarity? Or is this just me refusing to evolve? Because every man has emotions, but not every man has command. And truth, without command, is just noise. Be honest for real. Have you ever used truth to hurt instead of to heal? Drop a time you mistook venting for clarity. Let others learn from your growth. He says it with pride. I'm not emotional. As if it's strength, as if it's armor. But it's not armor. It's a Muslim. It's a man, trying to outrun the very thing that makes him human. The irony, he's drowning in emotion. But since he never learned to name it, it owns him. Silently, he doesn't yell, but he withdraws. He doesn't cry, but he drinks. He doesn't rage, but he disconnects from everything that once mattered. And that detachment, that numbness, he calls it control, but it's not. It's corrosion. He thought he was above emotion, but he was simply buried under years of unspoken chaos. Stoicism has been misunderstood. It was never about suppression. It was about sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius wept. Seneca mourned. Epictetus suffered. And yet, they didn't drown in emotion. They didn't deny it. They refined it. They knew a man cannot lead others until he learns to govern his inner storm. But today's man doesn't face his storm. He silences it, not because he's strong, but because he never learned how to swim through it. So what happens? That storm leaks into his tone, into his choices, into his silence. He becomes moody, short-tempered, distant, and no one knows why, including him. He just says, "I'm not emotional." But his entire life is being steered by feelings he never acknowledged. The man who claims he doesn't feel is usually the man who's bleeding internally and calling it discipline. Let me be clear. You don't need to cry. You don't need to collapse. You don't need to become soft. But you do need to see yourself clearly, nakedly, without excuse. Because when you stop recognizing what's happening inside, you don't become stronger. You become robotic, predictable, rigid, and ultimately, lonely. He didn't lose love. He just lost the ability to connect without armor. And connection doesn't require constant emotion. It requires honest presence. The man who feels but never speaks is not in control. He's in hiding. And every relationship he touches becomes a guessing game, a maze of moods and mixed signals, until eventually people stop playing, not because he's cruel, but because he's closed. There's a kind of isolation that looks calm from the outside, but inside, it's a scream no one hears. Machiavelli warned, a ruler who cannot read himself is unfit to rule others. So ask yourself, is your silent strategy, or is it fear, wearing the mask of strength? Because men who never show emotion are not unfeeling, they are untrained. And untrained emotion is like a fire, locked in a basement. It doesn't stay quiet. It builds pressure. And when it finally escapes, it doesn't warm. It burns. You've seen it. Explosions over small things. Withdrawal over misunderstandings. Weeks of coldness over one forgotten word. That's not stoic. That's suppression, masquerading as control. A true stoic doesn't react blindly, but he responds bravely. He says, I feel anger, I feel grief, but I will not be owned by it. He doesn't speak to vent. He speaks to reclaim clarity. So the next time you say, I'm not emotional, pause it. Ask, is that honesty? Or is that avoidance? Because emotion is not weakness. Emotion, when governed, is power. But émotion déniée becomes poison. And the men who poison themselves usually do it with a smile, a suit, and a rehearsed line that says nothing until one day, everything they love no longer recognizes them. Reveal without shame. What emotion have you been hiding in silence? That's been leaking out anyway. Type, I feel, followed by the one truth you've been avoiding. He looks around. Alone. Again. And he says it with conviction. They just don't deserve me. As if he's the prize. As if his absence is their punishment. But behind those words is not power, not confidence. It's loss, wrapped in ego, disguised as dignity. He wasn't walking away with pride. He was retreating and calling it strength. Men who repeat this phrase have usually burned bridges. With their silence, with their distance, with their unchecked fire. And when the people around them finally get tired of decoding their silence, absorbing their coldness, waiting for them to open up, they leave, quietly. And what does the man say? Not, what could I have done differently? Not, how did I contribute? No. He says, they just didn't deserve me. He crowns himself. The misunderstood genius, the unrecognized king, the unsung hero. It sounds like confidence, but it's loneliness. In Expensive Clothing, Machiavelli taught power without self-awareness is a throne built on sand, and a man who keeps losing connection, losing trust, losing people, yet never looks inward, is not noble. He's blind. Let's be clear. Sometimes, people really don't deserve you. Toxicity is real. Disrespect is real. But if every job, every woman, every friend ends the same way, then the common denominator is you. And this phrase, they don't deserve me, becomes a last refuge for the man who never learned how to grow. Instead of adapting, he labels himself. Instead of confronting pain, he declares himself above it. He starts to believe that being alone is proof of his greatness. But being alone is not always strategy. Sometimes it's just consequence. He called it high standards. But really, he just stopped evolving. The stoic man doesn't walk away to feel superior. He walks away when peace cannot be built. But he never leaves without first looking in the mirror, brutally, honestly, without flinching. He asks, did I show up fully? Did I speak with clarity? Did I own my role in how this ended? Because without that reflection, you don't heal. You just repeat in new places, with new people, but the same wounds. And every time you say, they don't deserve me, what you're really saying is, I refuse to look at what I'm carrying. Pride can feel like armor, but if worn too long, it becomes a cage. It isolates, it stiffens, it hardens, until no one gets in. And worse, you can't get out. Let me ask you, are you truly being rejected? Or are people simply exhausted by trying to love someone who refuses to be seen? Because if your version of strength requires others to constantly earn your softness, then your strength is a threat. Stoicism isn't about withholding. It's about honoring truth. And sometimes, the truth is brutal. You weren't the victim. You were the cause. Not because you're bad, but because you were blind to your tone, to your emotional absence, to your quiet demands that others love you while you stay untouched. They don't deserve me. No. Sometimes they deserve the version of you that never showed up. That's the truth. A stoic man must face, if he ever wants to become something more than his defense mechanisms. Because real strength is not in the walking away, It's in the staying present, without pride. As a mask, final reflection. What have you refused to take ownership of? In your past relationships or failures, type, "It was me." If you're ready to drop the mask and lead from within, you've heard the phrases, maybe. You've said them once, twice, too many times to count. And now, you see them for what they are. Not just words, but warning signs leaking out of a life that's been lived on autopilot. Every sentence you speak leaves a trail. Some build bridges, some build walls, some dig graves. And the question is no longer, do I sound strong? It's, is what I say aligned with the man I claim to be? Because the world isn't waiting for your wisdom, it's reacting to your presence. And your presence is shaped one sentence at a time. Look back at the excuses, the avoidance, the armor you wore, so long you forgot it was heavy. The "I'm just being honest," the "I deserve better," the "it is what it is." Each phrase, a mirror, each mirror, a crack. And cracks don't kill a man, but ignoring them does. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Now imagine what color your soul has taken on after years of speaking in shadows, in reflex, in retreat. The Stoic doesn't chase applause. He crafts language, as if every word were a blade, not to wound, but to cut through illusion. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it's with clarity, with command, with earned silence, in between each phrase. And that's the difference. Foolish men speak to feel important. Wise men speak because silence would be dishonest. So I'll ask you, one last time, now that the noise has faded, now that your language has been stripped bare, what will you say now? You've seen the mirrors. Now it's your turn to speak. What phrase from this video hit you the hardest? Comment it below. Pin it. Own it. And if this forged you, share it with someone who needs their wake-up call.